All right. Well, today we're doing a really different kind of video. This is not Come Follow Me with Fair. Um, Several of you have asked in the comments or sent me messages asking about my conversion story. How did I get from not in the church to here where I am today? And it's a great story, and I love to tell it. I didn't want to take away time from a regular episode. The focus of this series is on the scriptures and how we understand them and how we have conversations with our evangelical friends. And I really wanted to keep the focus on that. And if you happen to be interested in how I joined the church, you can watch this. So I'm glad you're here. So I did not grow up in this church. I did grow up going to church, though. I was actually a pretty oddly religious kid. I mean, it's a joke, but it was true. I used to get in trouble because I would sneak a flashlight under the covers at night so that I could read the Bible under the covers, right? Like I was 8 or something. I wanted to be at church every single time the doors were open. My very first memory in life, I was probably 3 years old. I remember playing in the closet and I was praying and I knew that God was with me. So as a weird kid, I don't know what to tell you. The church my family attended was wonderful in a lot of ways. They taught me to love the Bible. They taught me how to memorize scripture, how to study scripture. I learned a lot from them. But at the same time, I was having this other experience. My best friend in elementary school was a girl named Elisa, and we were instant friends from the day that we met each other. And I loved going to her house. Her family were Latter-day Saints. They were members of the church. I loved what it felt like to be in their house. I loved all of the experiences that I had there. I loved it. It was a great experience for me. I look back now and I say, oh, I was feeling the presence of the Spirit in their home. I wouldn't have had the words for it then, but that's what it was. In fact, my very first introduction to the Book of Mormon happened in their backyard on their swing set. Elisa and I would play on the swing set. She would tell me stories from the Book of Mormon because she was sort of a weird religious kid too. That's why we were friends. She would tell me stories from the Book of Mormon. She has 7 younger brothers. Her brothers would act them out, probably not accurately. I don't know. I don't remember. That was how I first learned anything about the Book of Mormon. We grew up in a fantastic part of the country, Central California, Stanislaus County, outside of Modesto, California. Modesto's getting a temple. Woo woo, super excited for them. Can't wait to go and get to see and experience all of that there. But that's where I grew up. We lived among orchards and vineyards and canals, and it was very agricultural based. So it was this kind of growing up in the country experience. My church at the time, the church we were attending was a really large church in the area. It drew a lot of people. And they gave us a pretty steady diet of anti-Mormon rhetoric. They would show us the Godmakers cartoon every year, right? So I was getting all of this from them, and I loved my church. So it was a really confusing experience to me because I have this great, like, running around the countryside with my friends who happen to be members of the church and just loving being in their home. And I'm also going to my church, which I love. And they're telling me, oh, no, these Latter-day Saint beliefs are not good. Here's why it's wrong. And I certainly didn't have the theological sophistication as a child to weigh out or even understand the arguments. I just knew that what they were telling me at my church couldn't be the whole story because I was having this experience with my friends. My conversion to the church, it includes several different sort of groups of people and individuals that shepherded me through this process, and they were the first ones. I eventually moved away from that area. I went to Christian University. I went to divinity school. After that, I got a master in divinity, which is a 4-year degree that pastors get. You learn how to read in Greek and Hebrew, you learn how to preach, you learn a lot of church history, you learn all kinds of other things. I loved it. It was a phenomenal degree for me to get. And I became ordained in a different Christian denomination, and I spent a good deal of my adult life working in churches. And I was really happy. I loved it. It was a great life. I wasn't searching. I was not looking for anything. If you would have told me that I would have changed churches or beliefs, I would have said, nope, you got the wrong girl. I'm good. And then here's how it happened. So the church where I grew up also had a really big problem, which is one youth pastor after another there for 2 decades at least. They were sexually abusing teenagers in the church. And I was one of those. And there's a bunch of others. And I had, over the years, I had tried to see if the church would take some accountability for that. And back then, I mean, this was in the 80s when it happened. The 80s, the 90s, even into the 2000s, mostly what would happen when you would talk about abuse stories is people would give you, a kind sympathy. I'm very sorry that happened to you. But there wasn't anything that could be done. That was the general feeling. And that was reality. There wasn't anything that could be done. And so mostly I didn't talk about it with people because I found that answer really frustrating. And I had in my mind, if I could just get them to say, yeah, this happened to you and we're so sorry, it would have changed a lot of things for me. But that never came. So I mostly put it away. And I thought, well, I've tried. You can't say I didn't try. I'm a very persistent person when I want to be. You cannot say I didn't try. I'm going to let it go. And then about 5 years ago, in the national conversation and in the news, things started to change around conversations about sexual abuse. All of a sudden, the response wasn't, I'm so sorry that happened to you. There's nothing that can be done. All of a sudden, the response was, wait a minute, we should do something about this. And I'm watching this and considering to myself, what does this mean for me? I don't want to go back and just approach the church again and just be ignored. That was pretty awful. So I thought I need to find a new way to deal with this. And I ended up deciding to do something I never thought I would have done. I was not, I'm going to run to the media and tell my story. I was never that kind of person. And I came to the conclusion of, well, maybe that's what needs to happen. And so I decided I was going to find a reporter to talk to. I went on the website of my hometown newspaper, the Modesto Bee. They are fantastic. And I just started reading stories. I thought, who do they have writing for them? Who could I reach out to? I hadn't lived in Modesto for a really long time by that point. So I just wanted to get caught up. And I read stories for a couple hours. And I'll tell you, a lot of those writers that I read, I have since met them. I have great respect for them. It's not that I didn't choose them because they weren't great writers. But I read through story after story after story, and I wasn't really compelled by any of them. It didn't feel like, oh, this is the person, until I got to one. And 3 sentences or a paragraph in, I just had the overwhelming feeling, this is who I need to talk to. And if you would have asked me at the time, I would have said it's about this story and abuse and maybe this person can help me. And I would have said that was all it was about. And it turns out it was about an awful lot more than that, is how it turned out. So we start writing stories. He's writing stories. They're about me and what's going on with the church. They're all online. You can go read them if you want to. Google my name. At some point, I make a decision that I also thought I would never make, which was, I want to try to take this church to court, see if I can hold them accountable, get them to change some things, all of the reasons why people do that. And so the paper's continuing to write about this. The pastor of that church, who I certainly didn't know, he was a new pastor by then. He was to give a response to these articles and the fact that I was suing them in the form of a sermon. And he decided to take Moses as his subject. And the gist of his sermon was this. Like, look, Moses made some mistakes and he was still God's chosen leader. And so when leaders in this church make mistakes, you probably shouldn't be too hard on them. Well, I did not love that sermon. Let's just say it that way. I was pretty upset about it. And the plan had been, me and this reporter, his name is Garth Stapley. Me and Garth were going to meet to talk on the phone after both of us had had a chance to listen to the sermon. And so I was full of spit and vinegar and told him all the reasons I hated this sermon and on and on and on. And he listened really politely. And he says, yeah, I hated it too, but I have different reasons. So really? Well, tell me. And he says, well, I have scriptures that you don't have. And I was shocked as anything. I said, no, you don't. What are you talking about? And you have to understand, he's at work. It's a newsroom for a newspaper. There's all kinds of other people around. He wisely says, like, I'm not talking about scripture with you while I'm at work, which was appropriate. And so I said, okay, yeah, I get it. We finished our conversation and we hung up the phone. And I think I probably texted him just about immediately to say, you have got to tell me, what are you talking about? You have scriptures about Moses? I need to know. And so he sent me a link to the church's website where you can read the book of Moses. So unlike most converts who start with some like really choice spots in the Book of Mormon, I started with the Book of Moses. That was the first Latter-day scripture I ever read. And I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how it was being used. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that I was fascinated and that I wanted more. So I kept going. I read the entire Pearl of Great Price that week, which is a book I'd never even heard of. Of course, I'd heard of the Book of Mormon. I'd never heard of Pearl of Great Price. I read it all that week. I was riveted and fascinated. I did not yet take it as scripture. I took it as super interesting, but interesting enough to keep reading. And by the time I got to the end of it, I had another thought that I had never had before, which was, maybe I should read the Book of Mormon. And so I started. I didn't know any missionaries. I didn't even currently in my life, I hadn't known somebody who was a member of the church for decades by that point. But I thought, okay, I'm going to read this. Garth, the reporter, very kindly agreed to let me pester him with questions, which I did. Question after question after question after question. And a few weeks, I'm reading along. A few weeks into that, he says, there are people whose full-time job it is to talk about the Book of Mormon. They're called missionaries, and you should meet with them. I said, absolutely not. There's no way I can ever do that. Sorry, thank you, no. I'll keep reading, but no. So that's what I did, kept reading. Every couple of weeks, he would make that suggestion again, and I would always turn it down. I was not prepared or really honestly ever intending to talk to missionaries. But I was having a spiritual experience with the Book of Mormon. I was coming to understand it as being from God, as it being scripture. I have probably read the Bible nearly every single day, if not every single week of my life. And I know what it feels like to read the Bible as scripture. And so I was shocked as anybody to be having the same experience while I was reading the Book of Mormon. There was nothing in my history that made that make any sense at all, but that's what was happening. And so one day I'm driving to work, and I saw two missionary sisters on the side of the road. I recognized their little name tags, and I was walking down the street, and I hear the Spirit saying to me, "You need to go talk to those girls." And they were right there, right? Like, I could refuse the request over over email. "You should talk to the missionaries." "No, I won't." Like, that was pretty easy. But here they were right in front of me, and I really felt God saying, "You need to talk to them." It's okay. That one I can't say no to. So turned my car around, parked the car, got out, and marched over to these girls and just said, "Look, I'm reading the Book of Mormon. I need you to help explain it to me." And they were shocked, of course. They gave me their card with their contact info on it. I didn't give them my name. I probably gave them my name. I didn't give them any way of getting in touch with me, not my email, not my phone number, not my address. I said, I'll get in touch with you. We'll set up a time to meet. And so got in my car and went to work. I did I emailed them that day and set up an appointment to meet with them the following week. In the meantime, 4 days later, I was at home. I was making dinner. I was making homemade pasta, which isn't something I make a lot, and so it's an ordeal, and it's a mess, and there's lots of flour, and there's a knock on the door, and I almost didn't answer it, but I did. And I go to the door, and there's two missionary elders standing there. And the first thing I said to them was, "How did those girls know where I live?" And they say, "What girls?" And they look at me like I'm a crazy person. Said, I met two of your girl missionaries, and I have a meeting set up with them, and I'm halfway through the Book of Mormon, and now here you are on my doorstep. Like, how did you find me?" They said, we didn't know a thing about you, lady. We had an appointment that got canceled, so we decided to come out and use our time to knock some doors. And they knocked on mine. Turns out they were the elders assigned to the ward boundaries in which I lived, but I didn't know that at the time. So that Sunday, I was working at my church. I had a rare Sunday where I had no responsibilities. Just happened to work out that way. And I thought, I should go to a Latter-day Saints service just to see, just to observe. I am going to sit in the back. I might need to bolt out if I need to. I'm going to go real incognito. Nobody's even going to notice me, super low key. So I get up in the morning, I get dressed, I put on some jeans and a t-shirt and some casual shoes and show up for church. So you already know I was not the incognito person I thought I was going to be. Everyone in the building knew I was there. They were all incredibly kind to me. I feel like I probably met all of the sisters in that ward. Turned out that it wasn't the ward that the boundaries in which I live. So it took me a little bit to figure that out, but eventually I did. The next kind of group of people who shepherd me through this process are the people in that ward that I met. This was back during, we still had 3-hour church. It was the last year that there was 3-hour church. So the gospel principles class was still a thing. And so I would sit in gospel principles every Sunday. Thankfully, somehow, that ward was meeting in the 1 o'clock time slot, which happened to work for me because then I could go to my church in the morning, and I went to that Latter-day Saint service in the afternoons. If the timing had been differently, I don't know how that would have worked out. I kept a notebook full of questions, things I needed to hear other adults talk through. Not that the missionaries couldn't talk through it with me, they certainly could. But I needed to hear people who were parents and had jobs and who were my age and who I found to be credible. How were they understanding all of this? So we just went to town, to be honest. The instructor in that class would say, "I can teach you a lesson out of this book, this gospel principles book, or we could talk about the stuff that you already have written down in your notebook. What do you want to do?" Well, I always wanted to talk about my questions, and frequently I would be the only investigator in class. And maybe there'd be 15 or 20 so of the members from the ward, who many of whom have become dear friends to me now. And they would answer my questions patiently and carefully. And even when I came back with the same question week after week after week after week, because I couldn't wrap my mind around it, couldn't figure out how I really felt about some things, they were the ones who showed me, like, this is what it is, and this is what it feels like, and this is what it looks like. And just a phenomenal group of people that I got to meet there. One of my biggest struggles was I didn't know how I felt about having a prophet. That's a pretty common Protestant struggle when people are learning about our church. But you can see why that was an extra hard struggle for me. I had come from this religious experience growing up where a series of male leaders in the church had taken incredible advantage of their positions and had significantly harmed a lot of people, including me. And so the idea of saying there's one guy and he's this all powerful is how I was thinking of it then. I certainly think of it differently now, but he's this all powerful guy in the church. How can I know that he is not abusing that in some way? And that's a hard question to answer. And bless them, they hung in there with me, and we worked on that question for a long time. And I was meeting with the missionaries every week. We would the sisters that I met on the street, they weren't in my ward, but I still wanted to be taught by sisters, so they would meet the elders. Garth, the reporter, he lives in California. I live in Seattle, Washington at that time, so he would join us on Zoom or Skype or something to join our lessons virtually. Often there would be somebody from the ward, maybe even the senior missionary couple. We had these giant lessons, did them every single week for 9 months. Talking about questions there too. I certainly wanted the input from the missionaries. So one day I show up for a lesson and the missionaries say to me, President Nelson is coming to Seattle. He's going to be giving a talk at Safeco Field. It's not called Safeco Field anymore. It's the baseball field in Seattle. It's called something different now. It was called Safeco Field. He's coming to Safeco Field, and we got you a ticket. So you'll get to go and hear President Nelson in person. And I was smack in the middle of my struggle over what does it mean to have a prophet at that point. I said, yes, absolutely, I will be doing that. And so I showed up. It's a gigantic stadium. It's full of Latter-day Saints in their church clothes. And I mean, the evening, it was great. President Nelson was President Nelson. Like he's doing his thing and he's fantastic. But it wasn't anything actually about him that made me make some movement on this issue. It was that I sat with my friends and other people that they knew. And before the whole thing started, everybody talked about their experience of having a prophet and what that was like for them and what that meant for them and kind of who like their prophet was. I think that just means like the one from when they were growing up. And the testimony of those friends about what it meant to have a prophet, that settled everything for me. I saw the trust that these people were putting in that and how it worked and how it functioned and how it blessed them. And I think even before President Nelson stepped up to the microphone and said a word, I'd already made the movement I needed to make on that. And so that was a delightful experience for me to have. Eventually, we set a baptism date. And I had to begin the process of letting people in my life know that this is going to be what I was going to be doing. And I'm sure you can imagine that didn't always go well. There were some people in my life who were really, really hurt by my decision. And understandably so. I sympathize with them. And at the same time, this is the decision I made. My only regret is I didn't make it decades earlier. I wish I could have. It's hard to hurt people you love with a decision you make And this was absolutely the right decision for me. So I went through that process. I had been ordained. So I had to go through the process of letting the leaders above me know what had happened, went through the process of becoming unordained, set a baptism date. I'm thrilled to be actually making this video today. Today's January 26th. Today's the 4-year anniversary. I feel emotional about that. Today's the 4-year anniversary of when I got baptized. It has been an incredible challenge in some ways to join this church, and it has cost me dearly. And I didn't think I was gonna cry. And I am so glad for this church, for the long history, all the way back to my friend Elisa and her brothers. My friend Garth, the reporter, the missionaries that I met, my friends at my new ward, all of the people who helped me along in this journey, incredibly grateful for their help. I wasn't looking for anything. I was happy in my church. I didn't know what I was missing. I am happier now in my faith. I feel closer to God. I feel more complete. It doesn't even encompass, that isn't even the right word for it. I don't know how else to say it. If it is the right thing for me. And incredibly, incredibly grateful to be here. So there you go. That's my conversion story. If you have questions, if anything in there you would like to hear more about, please shoot me a message, Jennifer@fairlatterdaysaints.org. Leave a comment in the video. Happy to connect with you on any of that. Otherwise, I will see you in our next video, back to our regularly scheduled Fair for Come Follow Me. I'll see you then.